You! Out! Now!
I'm the owner. I'm in the middle of service. What's the problem?
I didn't ask who you say you are. I asked what you're doing back here.
This is my kitchen. I've worked here for years. These are my staff.
You don't look like the one who runs this place. Put
I
that
have the
down and
keys,
step
the
away from the
paperwork.
line.
Everything is in my
Keys
office
don't
right
prove
there.
anything. Anyone can grab an apron and pretend they've...
The kitchen of a busy restaurant is a symphony of controlled chaos. There's the rhythmic thwack of a chef's knife against a wooden board, the aggressive hiss of cold protein hitting a scorching grill, and the constant, low-frequency hum of industrial refrigerators. For the owner, this isn't just a place of business, it's a sanctuary. It's where recipes passed down through generations become a livelihood. On this particular Friday night, the air was thick with the scent of seasoned flour and searing steaks. Orders were flying, the heat from the stoves was rising, and the owner, a man who had spent 15 years building this dream from a single food truck, was in his element. He was wearing his apron like armor, focused on the plate in front of him. But then, the rhythm broke. The swinging doors to the kitchen didn't open with the familiar grace of a server. They were kicked back with a violence that made the copper pans hanging from the ceiling rattle. Above the sizzle of the fat, a new sound cut through. The heavy, unmistakable clatter of a duty belt and the crunch of polished black boots on the tile. "You! Out! Now!" the voice boomed. The owner didn't even have time to set down his tongs before a hand gripped his bicep. Not a request, but a physical claim. In an instant, the sanctuary was breached. The man was no longer a business owner, a taxpayer, or a chef. To the officer in the room, he was simply a body to be moved. Welcome back. Today, we're looking into a case that forced an entire city to look into the mirror and reckon with the price of an abuse of power. It's the story of a man who was dragged from the very heart of his own establishment, humiliated in front of his customers and staff, all because an officer decided that his badge carried more weight than the Constitution. This isn't just about a bad night at work, it's about a $2.6 million wake-up call that proved that even behind the closed doors of a private kitchen, the law still applies to those sworn to uphold it. If you believe that no one is above the law and everyone deserves respect in their own home or business, hit that subscribe button. We dive deep into the cases that define our rights, and this one is a masterclass in standing your ground. Now, to understand how a routine Friday night turned into a multi-million-dollar legal battle, we have to look at the man behind the apron. The owner, let's call him Andre, was a pillar of his neighborhood. He wasn't the kind of owner who sat in a back office counting receipts. He was a lead from the front kind of guy. He knew the names of his regulars' children. He donated the leftovers to the local shelter every Sunday. For Andre, this restaurant was more than a paycheck. It was the realization of the American dream. He had navigated the red tape, the high interest rates, and the grueling 18-hour days that sink most small businesses in their first year. He had survived. By the time our story takes place, the restaurant was a success. It was the kind of place where the mayor would occasionally stop for lunch, and where the local high schoolers had their first dates. It was a safe space. But for a black man owning a successful business in this particular part of the city, that safety was always a fragile thing. There was an unspoken tension with the local precinct, a series of compliance checks that felt a little too frequent, and patrol cars that seemed to linger just a bit too long in the parking lot during closing time. Think about that for a moment. You've done everything right. You've paid your taxes, you've created jobs, you've followed every health code and fire regulation, and yet there's a nagging feeling in the back of your mind that you are being watched, not for your protection, but for a mistake. The conflict didn't start in the kitchen, it started outside, over something so trivial it's almost hard to believe. A minor parking dispute. A delivery driver had pulled into a spot that an arriving officer wanted for his patrol car. It was a moment of ego. Instead of a simple request to move, the officer, a veteran with a reputation for a short fuse, decided to escalate. He didn't just want the spot, He wanted the driver to feel the weight of his authority. When Andre stepped out to see what the commotion was about, he did what any business owner would do. He tried to de-escalate. He offered to have the van moved immediately. But the officer wasn't looking for a solution. He was looking for a challenge. "You need to step back," the officer barked, his hand hovering near his belt. Andre, confused but still professional, explained that he was the owner and that they were in the middle of a dinner rush. He went back inside, thinking the matter was settled once the van began to move. He went back to his kitchen, back to his grill, and back to his staff. But the officer wasn't finished. To him, Andre walking away wasn't a resolution. It was an act of defiance. It was a contempt of cop moment. The officer followed him. He didn't wait for backup. He didn't ask for identification. He pushed past the employees only sign, ignored the startled gasps of the diners in the front booths, and stormed into the heat of the kitchen. Imagine the sensory overload. The kitchen is 95 degrees. There are open flames. There are knives. It is a high liability environment. And here comes a man with a gun and a grudge, charging into a space where a single slip could cause a catastrophe. "I told you to stay out here!" the officer shouted over the noise of the exhaust fans. Andre turned, spatula in hand, his face slick with sweat. "Officer, you are in my kitchen. I have orders to fill. Please, we can talk in the office when I'm done with this rush." That was the inciting incident. In the officer's mind, a request for a professional boundary was a threat to his dominance. He didn't see a businessman. He saw a person who wasn't complying with his unspoken demand for total submission. The officer moved in. He grabbed Andre's wrist, twisting it behind his back with a force that sent the spatula clattering to the floor. The kitchen staff froze. The sound of sizzling meat continued, but the human element of the room went deathly silent. Andre tried to pull away, not to fight, but out of a purely instinctual reaction to pain. "What are you doing? I'm working! You're hurting me!" The struggle was brief but violent. The officer, significantly larger than Andre, used his weight to drive the owner toward the back exit. Andre's apron caught on the corner of a prep table, tearing with a sharp, sickening rip. He was dragged past his line cooks, past the dish pit, and out into the alleyway. The customers in the dining room watched through the pass-through window in horror. Some pulled out their phones. Others just sat there, forks halfway to their mouths, as they watched the man who had just served them bread being treated like a fugitive. In the alley, the officer slammed Andre against the brick wall. The cold air hit his sweaty skin, a jarring contrast to the heat he had just left. The handcuffs clicked into place. Tight, bone deep, tight. "You're under arrest," the officer growled. "For what?" Andre gasped, his cheek pressed against the rough masonry. "Obstruction, resisting, take your pick." But here's the thing about the modern era. The walls have eyes. The restaurant's high-definition security cameras caught every second. They caught the officer entering without cause. They caught the lack of provocation. They caught the physical escalation. And more importantly, they caught the officer's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated anger that had nothing to do with public safety. Andre spent the night in a holding cell. He was still wearing his kitchen whites, now stained with grease and the dirt from the alleyway floor. He sat on a cold bench, thinking about the steaks that had burned on his grill, the customers who walked out without paying, and the reputation he had spent 15 years building that was now, in his mind, shattered. He wasn't thinking about a lawsuit yet. He was thinking about his life. He was thinking about how quickly the American dream can turn into a nightmare when someone with a badge decides they don't like the way you look at them. The next morning, the charges were filed: resisting arrest and obstructing a governmental investigation. But when the precinct commander saw the footage, the tone started to shift. Usually, these things are swept under the rug with a dismissed with prejudice agreement where the victim promises not to sue in exchange for the charges being dropped. But Andre wasn't interested in a quiet exit. He felt a deep, vibrating sense of injustice. He didn't just want the charges gone, he wanted an acknowledgement that he had a right to be in his own kitchen. He hired a legal team that specialized in civil rights, and they didn't just look at that one night. They looked at the history of that officer. They looked at the city's training manuals, and they found a pattern. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It was the inevitable result of a culture that prioritized officer ego over citizen rights. The city's first defense was predictable. They claimed qualified immunity. They argued that the officer was making a split-second decision in a high-pressure environment, and that even if he was wrong, he shouldn't be personally liable. They tried to paint the kitchen as a dangerous scene, where the officer felt threatened by the knives and the heat. But Andre's lawyers were prepared. They brought in restaurant consultants to testify that a professional kitchen is a highly disciplined environment. They showed that Andre never raised his tool as a weapon. They showed that the only person creating a dangerous scene was the man who charged into a room full of fire and boiling oil to settle a parking dispute. Drop a comment if you've ever worked in food service. You know how tight those spaces are. You know how much focus it takes. Imagine an outsider coming in and physically grabbing you while you're holding a knife or working over a deep fryer. That's not just an arrest, it's an endangerment of everyone in that room. As the case moved toward trial, the city tried to settle. They offered $50,000, then $100,000. They wanted it to go away before the public saw the full Bodycam footage, the part where the officer, while driving Andre to the station, used a series of racial slurs that proved his motivation wasn't obstruction, but something much darker. Andre refused every offer. "It's not about the money," he told his lawyers. "It's about the fact that I couldn't even stand in my own kitchen without being afraid. If I take the money and stay quiet, the next guy might not survive the alleyway." The trial became a spectacle. The courtroom was packed with Andre's customers, his staff, and members of the community who had seen the video online. The city's lawyers tried to grill Andre on the stand, trying to make him seem aggressive. "Weren't you frustrated?" they asked. "Weren't you shouting?" "I was protecting my business," Andre replied, his voice calm and steady. "I was protecting my staff. The only person shouting was the man who didn't belong there." The climax of the trial came when the officer himself took the stand. It's a moment that legal analysts still talk about. He tried to maintain his tough-on-crime persona, but under cross-examination, he crumbled. He couldn't explain what investigation he was conducting in the kitchen. He couldn't explain why he didn't wait for the owner to finish a 3-minute task. And then, the lawyer played the audio from the patrol car. The silence in the courtroom was heavy. You could hear the officer's voice on the recording, vile, derogatory, and filled with a sense of ownership over Andre's body and business. The officer on the stand looked down at his hands. The city's defense team looked at the floor. In that moment, the qualified immunity defense didn't just look weak, it looked like a joke. The jury didn't see an officer doing a hard job. They saw a bully who had used the power of the state to settle a personal grudge against a man he deemed less than. When the jury went into deliberation, the city was sweating. They knew they were in trouble, but they didn't know how much. They were expecting a few $100,000, the standard for a civil rights violation with no permanent physical injury. But the jury wanted to send a message. They talked about the sanctity of the threshold. They talked about the psychological damage of being humiliated in the place you built with your own hands. They talked about the fact that if a successful business owner isn't safe in his own kitchen, then no one is safe anywhere. They were out for 6 hours. When they returned, The foreperson didn't look at the officer. They looked straight at Andre. "We find for the plaintiff." The number they read out silenced the room. $2.6 million. The breakdown of that $2.6 million was a surgical strike against the city's treasury. A portion was for compensatory damages, the lost business, the legal fees, the therapy. Andre needed to deal with the anxiety that now flared up every time he saw a blue light. But the bulk of it, that was punitive. Punitive damages are designed to punish the defendant and deter others from committing similar acts. The jury was effectively telling the city, "Your training is a failure. Your oversight is a failure. And if you don't change the way your officers treat your citizens, we will bankrupt you one verdict at a time." Think about that figure. $2.6 million for a 15-minute encounter. It seems like a lot until you realize it's the only language that city governments seem to understand. You can protest, you can petition, you can vote, but when you hit the budget, that's when the policy changes. The aftermath was swift. The officer wasn't just suspended, he was fired. The city council, facing a massive hole in their insurance and a public relations disaster, passed a series of new ordinances. They mandated de-escalation training that wasn't just a box to be checked. They changed the rules for entering private businesses during non-emergencies. But for Andre, the victory was bittersweet. He went back to his kitchen, but the atmosphere had changed. Every time the door swung open, his heart rate spiked. He found himself looking at the "employees only" sign and wondering if it meant anything at all. He used a portion of the money to give his staff bonuses, the people who had stood by him and watched their boss be dragged through the dirt. He used another portion to set up a legal defense fund for other small business owners in the area. But the trauma of an event like this doesn't wash off with a check. Andre spoke about the phantom grip on his arm, the feeling that someone was always about to grab him from behind. This is the part of the story that doesn't make it into the headlines. The $2.6 million is the win, but the loss of peace is permanent. We often talk about these cases in terms of numbers and legal precedents, but we need to talk about the human cost. A man's dignity was treated as collateral damage for an officer's bad mood. The city didn't just lose $2.6 million. They lost the trust of a community. They lost the belief that the police are there to protect the creators and the builders. This case serves as a landmark for the kitchen cases, a series of lawsuits across the country involving police overreach in private business spaces. It established that a kitchen is not a public square. It is a workspace with a high expectation of privacy and safety. It also highlighted the importance of high-quality surveillance. Without those cameras, this would have been Andre's word against the officers. And we know how that story usually ends. The officer would have said Andre swung a knife. The officer would have said he feared for his life. The charges would have stuck, and the restaurant would likely be closed today. The $2.6 million wasn't just for the dragging, it was for the attempted assassination of a man's character. As we look at this story, we have to ask ourselves, how many more Andres are out there? How many people don't have the cameras? How many don't have the $20,000 retainer for a top-tier civil rights attorney? The $2.6 million verdict is a beacon of hope, but it's also a reminder of how high the bar is for justice. The city tried to appeal, of course. They argued the award was excessive, but the appellate court upheld it. They noted that the racial nature of the verbal abuse in the patrol car was an aggravating factor that justified the high punitive amount. They essentially told the city, you hired a man with these views, you gave him a gun and a badge, and you let him loose on your citizens. This is the price of that negligence. Today, Andre's restaurant is still standing. It's a little more famous now, but for reasons he never wanted. He's become an accidental activist, a man who proves that you can fight City Hall and win. But he'll be the first to tell you that he'd give every penny back to have that Friday night go differently, to have stayed in his kitchen, to have finished that plate of food, to have never felt the rough brick of the alleyway against his face. The $2.6 million isn't a lottery win. It's a debt paid by a city that failed one of its best citizens. It's a reminder that your kitchen, your home, and your business are your castles, and the law doesn't get to kick the door down just because it wants a parking spot. What would you do in Andre's shoes? Would you have taken the quiet settlement, or would you have risked everything to go to trial? It's easy to say we'd fight when we're watching this from a screen, but when the weight of a whole city is against you, that choice is a heavy one. Drop a comment below. Let's talk about the boundary between authority and the individual. Let's talk about the value of a man's dignity. Because stories like this only matter if we learn from them. If we ensure that the next time a door is kicked open, there's a consequence waiting on the other side. Thank you for watching. It's because of viewers like you that these stories get the attention they deserve. Make sure to like this video if you think the jury got it right, and share it with someone who needs to see what standing your ground looks like. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the cases that define the American experience. Until then, keep an eye on the door, keep your cameras rolling, and never let anyone tell you that your rights stop at the kitchen door.